Hello and welcome into the Recruiting Blitz Inside Nebraska's recruiting podcast. I am Greg Smith, senior recruiting analyst. I'm joined once again by Jansen Coburn, our digital content extraordinaire and also staff writer. Jansen, how are you, man?
Doing good, Greg. It's crazy that we're already on to the 2024 class.
It in some ways it feels like this happened so fast, and in some ways it feels like we've been talking a little bit about 24 here for a while. As now we've put kind of the 2023 class in the books, and Matt Rhule and his staff have been working on 24 kind of at the same time, and which is kind of the luxury of kind of the early signing period and kind of the mad dash that it is there in the beginning, is that it allows you in January to really take a look at those 24s, and Nebraska needed to make some inroads there, as you know, other schools had been doing the same thing, and so they needed to go ahead and do that. So I thought we would go ahead and take a look at some of the questions for 2024, some of those pressing ones coming up here to kick off the cycle. So Jansen, fire away, man. What do you got?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Dylan Raiola, so I wanted to start off with a question that's not so much Dylan Raiola, and that would be, it involves him anyhow. Who is Nebraska's top priority player or players of 2024 besides Dylan Raiola?
Man, you know, it's really interesting that Dylan Raiola is going to come up so much, like until from now until well, really before now, until whenever he decides to commit to a school and maybe even continue beyond that, considering he's the number one player in the country. But so it's a really good question. I think one of the guys that comes to mind for me has a brother on the team, plays a position that's going to get a lot of attention always anyway, in cornerback, not quarterback, and that's Mario Buford. He's a four-star cornerback down in Dallas. His brother obviously on the team right now, Marquise Buford. Mario has been on campus quite a few times already, both to see his brother and be recruited by Nebraska. I think that's an early test of a guy that is kind of a must-get for Nebraska that doesn't seem to come up as much as maybe some of the other guys, because there are also some guys that are in state that I think Nebraska is just going to have to get, and that's where I'm going to go next. Another defensive back who could also play wide receiver, I guess, at the next level. Caleb Benning is obviously a legacy prospect here at Omaha Westside. Dad Damon played here in the 90s, won national championships, the color commentator for the team right now. A lot of ties there. That's going to be an interesting one to follow as well for all of those reasons I laid out. And most importantly, Caleb is a really good player, right? Like, he's a player that Matt Rhule, I think, and his staff are going to really be drawn to based off of how he plays and his intangibles off the field as well, the leadership and everything that comes with that. There is another in-state player that definitely plays kind of a glamour position that has continued to see his stock rise, and that's offensive tackle Caleb Pyform. He's going to be a kid that is really coveted in this region. I know that he likes Iowa a lot. He talked to our Iowa Rivals guy probably about a month ago now and said that Iowa was really kind of pushed to the front of the line for him based off of the way that they had been recruiting him. And I said this on our Insiders board when that kind of came out, and I'll say it again here because I know people listening to this are like, oh, no, Iowa, come on, man. You got to understand that for Caleb, Iowa really turned up the heat on his recruitment when Nebraska was going through all this transition, right? So really, from the time that kind of Scott Frost was fired and the whole Mickey Joseph interim situation, and Mickey Joseph not getting the job, to hiring Matt Rhule, and then Matt Rhule trying to figure out what was going on with 23 while also balancing 24's class, Iowa did a really nice job. You have to hat tip to them, as much as we don't want to around here, right? But I do think that Nebraska will get back in this, and I think that they'll be a major factor. Not even to say that they're out of it. I think that they will be a major factor. So those are a few guys right off the top that are guys that are going to be major priorities for this year.
Now, obviously, Dylan Raiola is the top priority for the class, but it makes you wonder, and I feel like this is an interesting question to ask, and Nebraska fans probably wouldn't like to think about this question, but if Nebraska does miss on Dylan Raiola, number one, who is their backup option, or is there a backup option? Mm-hmm. And two, could Daniel Kalen from Bellevue West be in the mix if Nebraska needs a new quarterback priority?
Yeah, it is interesting. I know that people don't want to think about it. And it's interesting for a few reasons. Number one is that and it doesn't. It sounds weird to even say Nebraska's putting all of their eggs in the Dylan Raiola basket, because of course you put all of your eggs in the Dylan Raiola basket. He's the number one player in the country, not just the number one quarterback, the number one player. So of course you're going to do that. Okay, so that's not even a question to do it. But if they do happen to miss on him, one thing that really makes this fascinating to me is that there have not been a lot of, if any, new scholarship offers that have gone out for the 2024 class at quarterback just yet from Matt Rhule, right? We've seen scholarship offers go out for a number of other positions, but we just haven't seen it for quarterback, which is a big time indicator that they are telling Dylan that he is their guy and that they're going to be locked in with him until they can't be anymore. He tells them no, which again is the right thing to do. But one of the other quarterbacks that Nebraska has actually kept in contact with is Danny Kaelin, right? And I think that part of it, and you have to, if you're Dylan, though, you do understand that, because he's Danny is right here in the backyard at Bellevue West. You're obviously recruiting two of his wide receivers in Davon Hall and Isaiah McMorris, so you're not going to just ignore him when you go to campus, or if they have an event and he comes out. So I do think that Danny Kaelin is in the mix for that guy if it is not Dylan Raiola, and I think that would be a fine, I hate to even say backup, because most years that would be the Nebraska's top choice and it would just be fine. Like, it would be kind of wrapped up and it would be totally okay, because what you're seeing with Kaelin is his recruitment blew up kind of early on, right? And he got that, I think it was North Carolina or Florida State. I'm sorry, it was Florida State that offered really early. Then Nebraska kind of came in. Then his recruitment kind of went on pause. And as he's in his sophomore year, he really split time, didn't really play that much. To his credit, and I always say this about Danny Kaelin, after that kind of rough sophomore season where he was expected to blow up in high school and didn't, his credit, he went back in the lab, right? Between his sophomore and junior year, really got a lot better, got bigger and stronger, came back his junior year, had a really good year last year, continued to see his recruitment blow up. You're starting to see, again, some additional offers come in. North Carolina, Miami, Colorado, among others, have come in here recently. He just went out to Colorado to see Coach Prime a couple of weeks ago when the contact period was going on. And I know he wanted to get down to Miami as well. And so his recruitment is taking off nicely, right? And so he's got options. And so that's what another factor will make this really interesting is he has the luxury to not necessarily wait around for Nebraska if he doesn't want to, though I think he will in the end, and kind of see what happens with the Dylan Raiola situation.
Now, staying on the topic of the in-state recruits in Nebraska, I know you touched on a few of those names. Let's kind of go down the list and talk about some of those early in-state players for 2024 that have emerged. Who are some of those guys that Nebraska fans should know?
Yeah, so I guess when we were talking about must-get guys, I totally forgot one. This is my bad. And this guy would go into the must-get guys category, absolutely. And that's tight end Carter Nelson out of Ainsworth. That's my bad. So Carter is a national recruit when it comes to being a tight end. Everyone, it feels like every college football coach in the region especially has been up to Ainsworth during the contact period to see him play basketball or to visit the school. Marcus Freeman from Notre Dame was up there. That was a big deal when he went out there. There are a number of other coaches that went up there. That is going to be a huge test for Matt Rhule and Bob Wager to keep him home. And we know that those guys went up there during an official visit weekend even to see him play ball, and there were all the pictures on social media and all of that. So the effort is definitely going to be there. So that's definitely first and foremost someone to mention. There's not only someone to watch out for that people need to know, but is also a must get. I mentioned Davon Hall, the wide receiver out of Bellevue West. I kind of like him also at defensive back. I'd be interested to see if Nebraska wants to keep him, if they got him, if they would want to keep him at wide receiver, if they evaluate him at defensive back, because wide receiver is always a spot where there are so many guys around the country where you could bring in at that position. And I like Davon. Davon is a good player, a four-star player out there as well. Caleb Pryform, who I mentioned earlier, is an offensive tackle, is in that must-get category, but definitely someone to keep in mind. The same thing with Caleb Benning at defensive back. One guy we haven't talked about at all, Isaiah McMorris, teammate of Davon Hall and Danny Kaelin, who actually has become the biggest recruit of all of those guys. Like, his recruitment is absolutely blown up. If you haven't seen any of that, Oklahoma, Penn State have offered him recently here, and I don't think that that's over. I think that he's going to continue to get more and more offers. And what I kind of picture Isaiah as is to me, he's like Jalen Lloyd, except for all of this is happening a lot earlier than it happened for Jalen Lloyd, where Jalen kind of blew up late in the cycle and had additional offers and opportunities. But the secret is out on Isaiah. He's a really twitchy kid, could be a great slot receiver in college, and his stock is just going to continue to rise, especially if he gets out on the camp circuit and wants to continue to blow up his profile and like get his ranking up and all of that. He's going to be a kid that's really coveted. Then we mentioned Danny Kaelin, his quarterback, will continue to rise. And then the last one to mention was actually the latest offer of the 7 in-state offers for the 2024 class for Nebraska, and that's Ashton Murphy, big defensive/offensive lineman from Elkhorn South. Could be, I expect him to end up being in Nebraska's class. It just feels like those Elkhorn South kids end up at Nebraska, and it feels like they're churning out linemen left and right, which is a great thing for Nebraska. We always talk about how Nebraska needs to have those linemen, but Ashton Murphy definitely has the look of the next one.
Yeah. Now, last question I have for you today, Greg, and it's one of our Q&A questions. So thank you to everyone once again who's been asking questions, and you can comment more questions that we will answer in the future. What position group, not just player, but position group, do you think Nebraska should focus on for 2024?
Man, it's interesting because I just said that they always need to focus on the lines of scrimmage. So I'll take that out because to me, that's always a given. If I have, and I will write this about kind of the top 3 position groups that Nebraska needs to focus on, I always include offensive/defensive line because it's just important in football, but also especially in the Big Ten. We've seen that time and time again, right? So I won't go there. What I will say is inside linebacker. I think Nebraska will need to continue, especially in Tony White's 3-3-5 scheme. Nebraska is going to have to continue to get those kind of rangy sideline to sideline inside linebackers that have both some good size to them, but are also very athletic. Now, of course, everyone's looking for those guys to fit into various schemes, but Nebraska is definitely going to think Eric Fields, maybe that type of a profile. You know, Eric could end up playing kind of that rover safety position depending on how they go. We don't quite know there yet, but those types of players is what Nebraska's want to continue to hammer home and to get outside of kind of those offensive defensive linemen. Nebraska just doesn't have enough depth at that inside linebacker, and I think that Steve Mark did a really nice job of kind of highlighting that coming out of this signing class and about what's currently on the team, what Nebraska's bringing in, and that article is up on nebraska.rivals.com as well, and kind of check that out. But yeah, inside linebacker is where I would go to. I'm kind of got my eye kind of cast that way to say, okay, what is the new coach Rob Dvorak? What is he going to bring in, him and Tony White, for that inside linebacker spot?
Very well, Greg. That's all I got for you today.
All right, man. Well, hey, you guys, make sure you guys are subscribing to this YouTube channel. Get these videos directly in the feed. We greatly appreciate it. Also, like the video up, tell a friend, continue the discussion in the comments. As Jansen mentioned earlier, we definitely want to continue the conversation with you guys. Make sure you're checking out nebraska.rivals.com for continued coverage of all things Husker athletics, and we will catch you next time.